Extinction is a term that collapses things. It is made to grasp what cannot be grasped. It is a word given to those who are seen, by those of us who only attend to the world through what we can name. To name is to see, but more to recognize. To name, for us, is to colonize, to own and control. To name is to carve the world apart and configure it into what we can claim.
Half of my work is leaving, of knowing when to leave, of leaving despite expectations, despite money paid, despite what I want, despite anything, and saying, you know what, I'm not welcome here. I'm unwanted here. And not because someone said something to me, but because I just know inside of me that this is not my place. And I think the good intentions of the researcher are some of the most damaging things that we can conceive.
As they killed, they said, "You are this kind of thing." They said, "You are that kind of thing." They said, "We will take you and you will become known to us so that we can render our world from your breath. You will be known." You were the only one they found, and you became a holotype for all of your kind. You were the only one ever to be found, and in your finding, you disappeared.
Have you ever loved someone who hit the road and just went the other way?
Way down the street somewhere. I don't understand this, man.
It's not diversity. What's going on here is they are purposefully tearing down blocks of property. Whole block.
But what we practice due to capitalism and patriarchy and this like horrible disease of patriarchy and really white supremacy that has just pervaded our planet for so long, is that there's a conquering of a land and a renaming and a stripping and a reclassification of things that are already going on. So what stood before as an opportunity for biodiversity has just become a desperation, a desperation, and it's systemic, and it is definitely problematic.
Lost in this nightmare that I have created, and now regret I laid my life towards ending here. The damn, stale, broken cigarette. Hell's an ashtray. Keep your butt out.
In our third and last episode, we meet guest host Sharon Stewart, whose voice you may recognize from the Deep Listening miniseries that has been published along with this project. Sharon is a creator of sound works, researcher, musician, writer, poet, and deep listener. For this episode, she interviewed the geographer and sound artist Amer Kanngieser and the vocalist, writer, composer, and interdisciplinary artist Lisa E. Harris from Houston, Texas. Sharon spoke with them about themes of land, listening, and ownership. These interviews align with Sharon's current area of inquiry for the Artist Professorship Theory in the Arts, being ethics and ethical practices within artistic research and the creative arts.
Hello, this is Sharon Stewart with Land, Listening, and Leaving, talking to Amer Kanngieser and Lisa E. Harris. Themes of land, ownership, sound, the question of who owns sound, who owns music and creativity, the question of how we feel rooted in place, or why we might think we have an intrinsic right to record, to capture soundscapes. These are some of the things I wanted to discuss with geographer and sound artist Amer Kanngieser, University of Melbourne, Australia, and vocalist, writer, composer, and interdisciplinary artist Lisa E. Harris of Houston, Texas. I first came into contact with Amer Kanngieser's work through their 2016 article for the Journal of Sonic Studies, focusing on the site of Rajarhat New Town, a newly developing satellite town in West Bengal, India. And in 2020, I heard their talk at Sonic Acts in Amsterdam about the research they did on the island of Nauru in the Pacific, which has become largely uninhabitable due to intensive phosphate mining, a site of offshore incarceration and socio-ecological crisis. A combination of site-specific recordings and the voices of indigenous Nauruans speaking to their situation amplify deep relations to land and sea. Careful listening, activism, pirate radio, racism, ecocide, and the role of the sonic artist and researcher are among the themes evident in Amer's research, their theory always anchored in practice. I was curious to hear about their perspectives on the sounding voice within radical political organization, the idea of environmental kin study instead of case study, the impacts of listening to ecocide, and, perhaps most intriguing to me, the issue of ethical decision-making for the white settler field recordist and researcher. Amer's land acknowledgement can be found in the podcast notes. I opened our conversation with a question related to my deep listening practice from Pauline Oliveros. What am I excluding from my listening? And asked them who or what might be excluded in the format of the podcast and in our listening at that moment.
When I'm thinking about any kind of technology of recording or documentation, I always think about the materiality of the technology that I'm using in the very first instance, right? And so much of the technologies that we take for granted when we think about communication and transmission are all technologies that have come out of some kind of logic of militarization and logic of research and development and a particular kind of way of, I suppose, capturing the world and capturing sound. And so that's always something that I think of is like, what function did this thing serve? Where did this thing come from? What is this thing's history in the first instance? I have a very difficult relationship with microphones, to be honest, because I think of all the different ways that microphones and technologies of listening have been used to oppress and persecute people. So I think for me, one of the first things that I think about in any kind of form like this is, what are the histories of the devices that we're using? What are the histories of these practices in the first place? And so obviously podcasting has in some ways been touted as this kind of liberation of radio. Everybody can make a podcast. And I think to some extent that's true. But I also think that podcasts are, as we've already seen, extraordinarily white again. You know, the particular kinds of formats that podcasts often take place in are very American or very Anglo-European. There are particular ways that we tell stories on podcasts that are very Western, very American ways of telling stories, very European ways of telling stories. And so I think the thing is, yes, I think podcasts, the technologies associated with it has opened up new ways for other people to engage. But we are always practicing forms of exclusion and oppression in the ways that we use technologies because we never interrogate what we're actually doing. And I think if I have to think about who is here and who is not here, I also think about who is even going to listen. You know, how does this stuff get disseminated? Who is this of interest to?
Because Amer's work is also grounded in understanding the voice as an effective and ethico-political force, and because voices operate in public spaces to both create a sense of belonging as well as influence decisions on all levels regarding who belongs in a place, I turn the topic to their 2011 article entitled A Sonic Geography of Voice Towards an Effective Politics. asking about their connection and attraction to radical political organization. Did it have a certain sound, perhaps, that they were missing or seeking in their life?
For me, the work around voice and listening and organizing really came out of, I guess, noticing very much how the ways people speak, and not just the languages or whatever that people use, or, you know, the affectations or whatever that people have, but really almost how the viscerality of a body gets articulated in a way that someone speaks, and how on so many different levels that can impede and affect and almost, I would say, sometimes determine possibilities for working together across difference. And I was just really interested in how much that affected a dynamic within a group, and how much that affected people's capacities and also people's desires to work together, to kind of collectively work together. How do the shifting tonalities and cadences and rhythms and accents within these oftentimes quite stressful situations, how do they affect the atmosphere and the relationality within that space? You know, how do they almost create a particular kind of relationality within that space?
Amer's parents fled Germany after the Second World War, and they're witnessing how they and their adopted grandparents, who had survived the Holocaust in camps, communicated with one another through enduring stress and grief, had a lasting impact.
Just how much is said in voices and in sounds when things aren't necessarily being said. So how much is kind of said underneath something, or sideways, or, you know, through silence. You know, how much all these different sounds we make communicate so much about our histories and our dispositions and our capacities in ways that we may not even know ourselves. The shallows where the damsels are warm. They come together and sing their territories into being. Through purrs and grunts and chirps, they mark out the patterns of their worlds. Between corals and rocks and seagrass and sand, this is where they live.
That audio excerpt was derived from the online lecture performance Listening as Relation and Invocation by socioanthropologist Zoe Todd and Amer Kanngieser for the CTM Festival 2021 Discourse Series, Critical Modes of Listening.
Part of the work that I'm doing with Zoe Todd at the moment, and part of what we've been talking about for a long time, is invocation, and the different ways that how we articulate things, how we tell stories of places, how we narrate our relationalities to places, how we listen to places, are particular ways of invoking. I really do think that there is so much power in how we sound places in a way, and how we sound relations. It's not just in words, you know, I kind of want to get away from that. And one of the things that I really work on in listening as well is that it's not just oral listening. For me, listening is an entirely bodied thing. It's kind of more like sensing, almost like my skin is listening, or just, I don't know. I kind of feel like my whole body is a ginormous receiver or something. And so it kind of hits on so many different registers that I don't even know how much of it is actually oral.
While we are immersed in how our own ears and body sense vibrations in our environment, when recording, pretty much all the time, a microphone hears an environment in a different way than our ears do, due to how our collective, but also individual human ears and brains are designed to register and respond to sound. Psychoacoustics is a field devoted to understanding this. This is why listening to a recording later will often give you a sometimes very different impression of a soundscape. The microphone prioritizes different frequencies than your own ear does, and it doesn't get distracted by visual or other sensory input. How did Amer's use of recording technology evolve? and how are they connected to the field of acoustic ecology?
The person who I grew up with as a grandfather was a composer. And so when I was very small, he used to have this old tape deck, a reel-to-reel, and used to record me saying things and reading things. And we used to like pour water to make sounds of like streams and, play around with all of these different things. So I grew up with that really present, and I think also because I have a condition that's a sensory processing disorder. I don't really think of it as a disorder at all, but it means that I kind of hear everything at the same level. So if I'm kind of outside and someone's trying to talk to me, but I can hear the sound of a bird or there's wind or anything else, it's kind of all at the same level in my brain in a way. So I don't kind of put emphasis on the person. It's everything. It's like an entire sonic field that I hear in its entirety. And I think before I even knew what field recording was, that's how I've always experienced the world. So for me to kind of start, I don't know. I mean, I've had more problems with field recording, I think, than I've found it satisfying, to be honest.
I can very much relate to that. Absolutely.
Because, I've when I first started building microphones, I was very excited by how much it opened up. I was like, wow, I can hear this stuff, like having bionic ears or something. And that was amazing. But then I think what I struggle with acoustic ecology and field recordings is the segmentation of sound from itself, in a way. This kind of arbitrary imposition of beginning and end and saying this is the bit that's important. And this is the bit that I can hear in this moment, and everything else is kind of, I don't know, it's like damming a river or something, Yeah.
In 2020, Amer co-wrote an article with Zoe Todd entitled From Environmental Case Study to Environmental Kin Study, indicating a shift from a belief in the objective and analytical gaze, or ear, of the researcher toward a relational approach of understanding our kin, our relations. They, quote, propose a method of listening and attuning that can attend to the dislocation and abstraction often found in work addressing ecocide and environmental violence. A method called, quote, kin study, which invites more embedded, expansive, material, and respectful relations to people and lands, end quote. Now is a good time to say that links to articles cited can be found in the podcast notes.
It took me quite a long time to realize that the way I heard the world was not the same as everyone. It took a really long time. I thought that everyone constantly heard these relations between things all the time. And I think really, especially in the work with Zoe, we both have a very similar approach to the world in that I guess the way that we both inhabit the world is through this extremely relational way. It can be quite overwhelming, to be honest. It is a lot. It's kind of like being in a perpetual kind of psychedelia or something. But I think that's probably in part where our work comes from so much, is because that's how we experience the world, is these constant energetic or sonic flows and relations between everything. And I guess what we kind of came to together was thinking, well, this way of taking the world and cutting it into pieces and categorizing it, it is an entirely colonial approach to the world. It is an absolutely colonialist and capitalist approach to the world, is to cut things up and to segment them and to take them out of their relationality and to categorize them and to order them in a very specific kind of way, in a very European kind of way. And it's talking about these ecocidal and environmental catastrophes without any sense of relation to the place or relation between people and ecologies, like without any kind of, I suppose, like liveliness in a way. And we spoke about how it's this particular kind of flattening and abstraction and almost like, I don't know, it's a real deadening. And I see that as quite a violence. And I know that Zoe also perceives this as quite a violence, to kind of do this to places, to take away the life out of places and the relationality out of places. And we saw this particularly in work around environmental catastrophe. And so Zoe had already been working for quite a while on the idea of environmental kin study, and we came together around trying to understand the role of listening and attunement in being in good relation with place and in shifting this kind of perspective, I suppose, on how academics and how researchers and artists and, you know, cultural workers, how lots of people, policymakers, how, you know, a whole range of people approach sites.
I now pose the question that has been haunting me. Is it possible for a white settler scholar to mean well, to create a meaningful contribution or ethically enter a space to do research, when this might be in direct opposition to local understandings of the ongoing reciprocal relations of a place?
I don't think it is. I have to say that. You know, I am a white Australian German scholar, and I have been doing this work for a very long time, and I don't think it is possible to do it. You know, I think when I listen, I bring all of my lineages with me. I've been writing about listening as arriving, as coming to, listening as being with, and the most important part for me, which is listening as leaving, and leaving with grace. And, you know, I think all of my work around listening is precisely around this tension, because there are so many places that I've been that I know I am not, it's not my place to be, and I leave, you know, and I feel like half of my work is leaving, you know, of knowing when to leave, of leaving despite expectations, despite money paid, despite what I want, you know, despite anything, and saying, you know what, I'm not welcome here. I'm unwanted here. And not because someone said something to me, but because I just know inside of me that this is not my place. And I think the good intentions of the researcher are some of the most damaging things that we can conceive. And certainly what I've discovered through the work that I've done in the Pacific is that oftentimes my sheer bodily presence is doing harm, right? I don't need to open my mouth or say anything. Just being there already indicates something to someone. And that's something that we need to take seriously, because it doesn't matter how good my intentions are. That doesn't even come into it.
Amer's realization and commitment that sometimes, no matter how much they might want to do something, that it might just not be appropriate, has changed the course of their academic career. In the talk, Listening to Ecocide, Amer gave at the Sonic Acts Academy in 2020, they talked about attunement to the Pacific island of Nauru, which began with a powerful listening moment. A moment that revealed that listening to Ecocide can mean listening to silence. And I ask her about the process of attunement and engagement in this particular kin study.
That particular work was very... The work I do is very hard. It is extremely intense work. So Nauru was sort of initially colonized by Germany. And it was Germans who found phosphate in the first place, which is the resource that Nauru exports. And to be somewhere and to know that, you know, as a German Australian, being in a place that Germany's history with Nauru, Australia's intensive neocolonialism across the entire Pacific region, but with Nauru as well, because Australia has put one of its offshore detention centres on Nauru, which comes from this very long history of colonisation, the decimation of the land through mining, through phosphate mining, to basically shore up the agricultural stability of Australia and New Zealand, taking this natural resource from this one place to enable the economic and agricultural growth of another place, the absolute destruction of that environment, and then, the ongoing relationship, the ongoing neocolonial relationship with Australia, the economic relationship where the economy has then been run on, the detention of refugees and asylum seekers trying to come to Australia. There is such a horrific geopolitical history there, not even a history, contemporaneously as well. And to come there and to know this and to sit there and to listen to that space and to know that this is what is happening in that space is a lot. I don't really know how else to kind of speak to the gravity of that. And so I think for me, knowing all of these things and the fact that these are the frameworks for the work that I do is actually facing all of those things. And then to listen to the biophony of that place and to hear that one reed warbler. And I sat there, I went every night for over a week. I sat in the same spot and I just waited and waited and waited. And for me, that was incredibly illustrative of everything that I was speaking to people about, hearing from people about their experiences of ocean, ocean inundation, of food shortages, of drought, of extreme heat, of, the loss of land, all of these different kinds of climatic experiences that they were having just was so, I don't know, for me felt so articulated in that particular instance, in that particular experience of returning again and again to this particular site, and that being what the acoustic environment was.
Through my prompting, we turn back to the question of asking permission from a place.
I think the first question that I always ask myself is, do I need to be doing this? Is this for me to do? Is this for me to hear? Does this need me? And most of the time the answer is no. And I think maybe that's the first thing that we need to do, is to reconfigure our understanding of why we do what we do as something that is oftentimes driven very egoically and driven very much by a colonizer mentality of, I want this, I want to go there, I want to experience this, I want to record this, I want to put this into the world, and I want to lay claim to it. I want to be known for this. There is such a process of possession and ownership that goes on in that seemingly, again, I'll say benign, because I think for most field recorders and in most acoustic ecology, this is seen as benign. There's no harm generally attributed with this. It's like, oh, I want to go out and record this bird or record this waterfall or record this whatever. There's never a question of, does the waterfall want to be known by me? Does the bird want to be heard by me? It's never even brought up. And I wonder if perhaps that question of what relation do I have with this place? What relation am I willing to put the time and effort into developing with this place and people who live here, or to the people who this land is sacred or meaningful? Most of the time, people don't even know whose land they're on. They don't even know anything that's happened there, or what is special about that place, what is integral to that place. And I think maybe if coming from a position of saying, before I do something, I need to seek permission and I need to seek relation, and starting from there, I think things would look very different. I don't know. It would make things a lot sparser, I suppose, because asking permission, at least in my experience, is a very slow process.
Amer talks about the failing of equipment, or, in the anecdote she relays, dolphins failing to come close when she is in a rush or doesn't connect properly.
Maybe they also fail because we're not meant to be there. Maybe they fail because it's not for us to be there, you know? And I wonder if thinking about things from that perspective might change something, you know, to kind of move from this idea that the world is ours, like we have a right to the world, and to really think, am I invited? Am I wanted? What are my intentions? You know, what is my intention in this place? One of the things that I'm really working on now is thinking about listening as leaving, about knowing when to leave, and not just to leave in the sense of, oh, this is a failure, or, oh, I didn't get what I want, or, you know, with some kind of attachment to an idea of leaving that is negative, but leaving with grace, you know, like leaving with saying, I'm thankful that I know when to leave. You know, that's literally the best thing you can do, is to just leave it alone. Just respect it and leave it alone.
This might be your legacy, your contribution to the whole field of sonic ecology. The gracious act of being thankful and leaving.
You've got a right, you've got a right to the tree of life. You got a right, you got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life. You got a right, you got a right to the tree of life. You got a right to the tree of life.
Trained as an opera singer at the Manhattan School of Music in New York, Lisa E. Harris is a vocalist, performer, composer, poet, and, as they say in a recent acknowledgement of her receiving the Dorothea Tanning Award for Music and Sound, quote, Harris's work resists genre classification as Lee focuses on the energetic relationships between body, land, spirit, and place, using voice, theremin, movement, improvisation, meditation, and new media to explore spatial awareness, relationalism, intuition, panoptic surveillance, and personification. Lee maintains a focused concentration on healing in performance and living. End quote. I first met Lee in 2017 during the online Deep Listening certification program. Take a listen to the Deep Listening podcast mini-series to hear more. During that time, Hurricane Harvey hit her hometown of Houston, where she was immediately involved, both in witnessing the impact, as well as supporting her community, both during and afterwards.
You got a right to the tree of life.
Lee was born in the city of Houston, a sonically rich location, rising up in an area of wetlands and coastal marshes along the Gulf of Mexico. This sonic richness was often referred to by Pauline Oliveros, the visionary musician, deep listener, and our common source of inspiration, who was also born in Houston. I was curious about this connection to land through sound that Oliveros referred to so often. I opened the interview with a quote of Lee's from an interview by the artistic and life partner of Oliveros, Ione, in Balm magazine. Quote, during this hard time, the question is, can we find these micro spaces of time before acting in order to consecrate our actions? End quote. Taking that micro space of time and thanking her for coming to share a rich experience with us, I asked her which associations, drawing upon childhood, family stories, art, or music, came to mind with the word land.
It's such a great question that's like specifically specific to my childhood because my mother, her name is Landa. And so my earliest understanding of the word land really has to do with my human mother, who is Landa. It's a Spanish surname, and it refers to the land. And she just had she has that quality about her. She's very earthy. So that would be my very first recognition of that word being in my mom's name. Outside of that, I remember so early pine needles in my native Houston, Texas. That's one of my earliest childhood outdoor environmental memories, being in early pre-K, which is like kindergarten in America at an Episcopal church school, and walking outside in the fall around the solstice time and smelling the pine needles and hearing them. I remember that. And I often looked for that moment in those places throughout my life as I would come back to that city. And never really smelled the same as that initial smelling and recognizing of pine. We have this like mighty Mississippi River that's here running into the Gulf of Mexico that's like near Houston, but Houston gets the spoils of that. We have all of the import from all over the world coming right in as an entry point, going north through the United States onto Canada as an entryway, and also going down into South America. And there's something that those transactions and those energetic transactions are not lost on the people or the culture. It actually is the building blocks, the protein of the people and the culture combined. So even my musical or sonic upbringing, my cultural upbringing that has to do with sound and also food is so mixed.
Lee is a descendant of African as well as Cherokee and Blackfoot peoples who were enslaved and massacred during the horrific, surprisingly still barely taught colonial history of the United States, which underlies the current and urgent need for rightful acknowledgement. Her heritage is also part of her relationship to land, and she shares a bit of the history in this anthem she wrote on Juneteenth, 2020 with us.
I wrote this on Juneteenth, which is June 19th. It is a celebration generally of liberation, where enslaved people, specifically in Texas and where I am from, found out that the United States had actually abolished slavery 2 years, 5 months, and 18 days prior to when the enslaved people in Texas got the news. So we celebrate that now. It's tucked in between Memorial Day, which is a kind of summer solstice celebration, and also the 4th of July, which is kind of seen as like the birthday of America. It's tucked right in between that, and appropriately so. I think it should be commemorated as a not forgetting, as a not forgetting. So this is what I wrote for Juneteenth this year. They eat the kill and then have cake. What happens to captives when captives are set free to run on captured land? Is this called Jubilee? Should not their ancestral land be restored to them and them unto it? Black people, we have made a new covenant every time our feet stand upon the earth. We restore the captive land. She is set free to run through our captured feet. And this is just one reason why they make us to hover so the drip draws bone from the meat.
When we spoke, Lee was busy creating at a rising climate and crisis residency at a studio in the woods, dedicated to forest preservation on 8 forested acres on the Mississippi River.
Yes, I am currently outside of New Orleans, Louisiana, in the Gulf South, on the Gulf of Mexico. And I am at a residency called A Studio in the Woods, and it's focused on some aspects of climate change. My project here that I'm researching and being supported in is called Onshore Trilling, What to Do When the Earth Sings the Breeze. And this is a bit of a poetic title, as a lot of my work is centered around text and poetry, but I'm looking at onshore trilling as opposed to offshore drilling. I'm specifically looking at highly productive areas that are in near proximity to highly productive drilling sites offshore. And I'm curious about the practices that those coastal communities engage in, sustainable practices, and how being in such proximity to these events has changed their life, has changed the kind of sounds and movements and work that they create. So I'm also looking at that in my research as what to do when the earth sings the brews, like, is that the blues? And what is the correlation between these sonic happenings and occurrences in proximity to a site of trauma or a site of healing?
In 2017, another kind of sonic and traumatic impact occurred. Hurricane Harvey made landfall 3 times over 6 days, dumping massive amounts of water on the city of Houston.
26 Hurricane Harvey on its path of destruction in Texas at this hour. Storm officials are calling it a significant disaster so far.
We're in northeast Houston right now. We're about a mile away from Little York and Hempstead. This is not an area where we have covered a lot of flooding in the past.
And look at this incredible damage. This is devastation here. You can see all those homes there initially just flattened right along. Look at the telephone poles, all leaning, of course. Look at the water, the debris scattered everywhere.
The Governor Greg Abbott, holding a news conference live in Austin
first,
right now.
Now that the hurricane has come on shore, our primary concern remains dramatic flooding.
What does she remember from that day? And what did it mean to her?
So I remember hearing about Hurricane Katrina and wanting to leave New York, where I was studying, just to come and help. I didn't know what I could do. And I remember my mom telling me on the phone, just stay there. They have all the help that they can get here, but you can stay there and pray for them, pray for everyone, send good energy. You know, we really believe in that. We really believe in metaphysical, spiritual energy reaching. And that's what she asked me to do. Stay calm and be grounded. We'll need your strength later. And sure enough, I was reminded of that hurricane when Hurricane Harvey came back around to our own Houston. Being in Houston during that, I noticed the difference in the severity of this hurricane, and as rapidly as they're occurring, is that our technology is also rapidly and exponentially increasing as well. So we now have a technology that is in some ways helpful to get the information to us and to get, to let us know what's going on, but it also kind of distracts us from the feeling and the groundedness that we really need to have in order to be in nature while nature does her own thing. Like years before, we're from a lineage of people that have known hurricanes for generations, centuries in this area. And what they had to rely on was a different kind of technology that had to do a lot with our abilities that we talk about now with deep listening. It had to do a lot with telepathy and premonition and knowing and the relationship between yourself and your environment. But now we're relying on, we had the insistence of this modern day technology kind of helping but not helping, exacerbate the hysteria.
Lee talks about the way special effects like images of disaster can be both triggering as well as simply served up to the viewer as entertainment. But these events also generate collective creativity.
And my immediate response was to, okay, you have to turn off your computer and you have to meditate. And I did that. I did that for hours. And then I realized in my meditation, now you have to turn your computer back on and show other people how to do this and hold this space, like this kind of anchor of meditation as an option, as a way like to use the devices to reconnect us to do our own practice, and that's really like at the core of what I do.
Turning from the topic of natural disaster to the creativity that is triggered by our sounding and listening environment, I asked Lee about her ways of making contact with all the incredibly diverse places she performs in.
Well, when I make contact, my relationship to place and performance really stems back to my background in being a classically trained vocalist. And so I was always very interested in acoustics. That's not mandatory for vocalists to be interested in that way, but I definitely was. I would like to go to the hall and find the sweet spots. I was really, really interested in where the sound would ring out the most. There's an aria, Dixtoya Hala, and it's written really to like give reverence to the space, the architecture. So I remember circling buildings on the inside, wanting to go during sound check and find the places where, to practice and to familiarize myself with the room. So now and today, like in venturing off into performance art and public installation and interventions, I'm usually drawn to pedestrian spaces. I'm usually drawn to spaces that sometimes I feel are vortices. Vortices, I think, is the plural of that. But I've always been excited about vortices and like, oh, I can feel an energy in this place, or what used to be here. Or I feel like what I've described to my mother often as a well, like a physical running water well under certain places, like, oh, there's something here. So it's interesting that my work now is in energy extraction from the earth, as I'm kind of always sensing like a Geiger what is happening underneath the surface and kind of connecting at gravity level.
Moving from a connection to place to connecting with people, Lee often teams up with other performance artists, including Alicia Wormsley, Autumn Knight, Rashida Bumbre, Nicole Mitchell, and Abidjan Johnson, among others. I wonder how Lisa feels about the ownership of her own voice, the creations made in such close collaboration with others, and even who owns music?
Right, who owns music? That's a great question. There is a certain amount of stewardship that comes with being an artist. And I'm reminded also of another aria, Io son l'umile ancella, and it is from the opera Adriana Lecouvreur, and she says, I am the humble servant of the creative genius. And that has stuck with me for a long time since I learned that aria. I was like 19 years old. But there is, in that, I think that we have an opportunity to be really, really dutiful stewards of something that belongs to a greater. And just in that kind of succession of not something that belongs to me, but something that belongs to a greater, in that succession, and this is, everyone does not agree, certainly won't agree with this, but this is how I feel spiritually, that it's very easy then for me to speak with authority over what is mine or what is not mine. And when I say mine, it's because my relationship to possession has to do with my spiritual relationship and believing that I am from a greater. So so when I say mine, I'm like, this is my responsibility. This is my job. This is my duty. This was my project, my purpose. So it's not about my creation, but what we practice due to capitalism and patriarchy and this like horrible disease of patriarchy and really white supremacy that has just pervaded our planet for so long, is that there's a conquering of a land and a renaming and a stripping and a reclassification of things that are already going on. So what stood before as an opportunity for biodiversity has just become a desperation, a desperation, and it's systemic, and it is definitely problematic. I've had my own home. I made a film about this in 2015 called Children of the Lost. You guys can look it up as well. It is Act 2 of my new opera film, Cry of the Third Eye, which has 3 acts, and it follows my relationship to my neighborhood in Houston over the course of a decade.
Third ward is our home, yes. Third ward is our land. Third ward is our home, yes. Third ward is our land. Third ward is our home, yes. Third ward is our land. Third ward is our home, yes. Third ward is our land. Third ward is our home, yes.
And my grandparents' house, my relationship to inheritance, and also my relationship with this city and public policies such as eminent domain. In 2015, I was removed from my home, or asked to leave my home, because the city purchased the property due to eminent domain, which they have the overriding sovereignty to take land depending if it's good for the public or if it's for the public good. Of course, that is determined by the city themselves and private NGO, non-governmental organizations. So for pennies of what it was worth in a very, very, very lucrative area, my home and a lot of other homes was taken and destroyed. My grandfather owned this home and bought it with good American dollars that were backed by and weighted in good American blood and sweat that came out of his body. So he bought this with the idea to have something that could create a legacy that he could pass down. My grandfather, George Harris, believed very much in buying land and sharing and having land be his legacy. He told me when I was a child, always buy and take care of land. It's the only thing that they're not making any more of. And that stuck with me forever. He told me that as a child, and it's true. He's like, it's the only thing they're not making any more of, so take care of it and have it. And we did that in my family, and it was not easy. Speaking of ownership, speaking of property taxes, it's not easy, and it's not set up for people to actually have land. The way the banking systems are set up in laws. So we lost that battle, but on the other side of it, I had the opportunity to experience it as a witness and document it. So I can, the land and the story and the connection gets to live on through art.
Third ward is our land. Third ward is our home. Yes, third ward is our land.
Pivoting from this lived story involving land, documentation, and art, I turned the conversation toward a very exciting collaboration that involved another story. The fictional story of Lauren Oya Olamina and her Earthseed verses within the books by Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, both written in the 1990s. As collaborators, how did Lee and composer and flutist Nicole Mitchell make the choice of sounds for this work, Earthseed?
In all living things is seed, is mother to provide, in all living things is a yearning, reaching, listening to her song. The wind, the birds, the mother's song, walking with her. We lay on her. She fills us with herself.
Making Earthseed with Nicole Mitchell was a joy. One of our earlier collaborative experiences was thinking about the orchestration. So because we need, like everything, we need structure, we need like architecture. So she says, I remember Nicole called me and said, so we should think about what are the sounds. We know just like orchestral works from the classical and romantic periods that I love as well, from Europe even. When we're thinking about the nature, we're bringing in these instruments that are wood and, bringing in some shiny solar energy from brass instruments. But we were very, very much dedicated to working with electronics. So our orchestration consists of Tamika Reed on cello, Zara Zaharieva on violin, Julian Otis, who's a fantastic tenor, on vocals, along with myself on vocals. And I also played the theremin and other electronic instruments. Nicole Mitchell on flute and electronics. And Ben Lamar Gay, who is playing trumpet and electronics as well. Also, Avriel Ra, who is playing percussion. So we have this warm sense and chamber sense of wood string instruments with the cello and the violin. And there are moments and passes where we just have the strings played together to create that kind of environment that we recognize as earthen. And then we would bring in the voices, which, are in our interpretation, human consciousness and thought. Really the conscious mind in an earthen environment. The electronics lend themselves to a more Octavia's description of present future and where we can go from Earth and beyond. And we are doing that already. I mean, electronic music, using the theremin was particular for me because it's recognized as the first electronic instrument. But at this particular point in 2021, it's 102 years old. So, that's really, really interesting that is still so new. Some people have never even heard it. And we've had so many electronic instruments birthed since that creation. So I wanted to bring that instrument in as kind of a sense of origin or a sense of departure from one world to the next. We also had sounds, distortion, live distortion. Ben Lamar Gay was able to record us live and also echo throughout, using his electronics to echo and reconfigure sounds that we're making live to create something immediately new and introduced into the composition as well. I think that's really nice. An example of again, this idea of biodiversity and what can happen when we introduce new cultures and new abilities to adapt quickly, and what happens when that's incorporated into what's already going on.
In closing, I asked Lee about what she needs from us and the music industry, how the music industry could better listen to her as an artist and woman of color.
Like, we need gifts. We need gifts of in every sort of way. You know, me as a Black artist and as a Black woman, I need every sort of gift that I can receive. And that will allow me, like, just to have 9 hours of sleep. I mean, just some of the things that we're talking about today. This is just, it's a beautiful sunshiny day. I had a great amount of sleep. I had a little bit of time. And that, you know, just to have a little gifts of time and space will allow for the receiving and the regeneration of who knows what. I think the world will have the opportunity to allow the world to heal itself when we give ourselves, when we are able to receive gifts of nothingness, of nothingness, like, figure it out, of non-production.
Thank you. That idea of the gift and giving the gift of space, of quiet, openness, nothingness, time to get in touch with yourself, very caring. Thank you so much for that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Sounding Places, Listening Places, a Radio ArtEZ mini-series in which we explore the relationship between sound and our environment. Unfortunately, this was our last episode, but of course you can do some further listening in the last of our mini-episodes on deep listening. Sounding Places, Listening Places was commissioned by ArtEZ Studium Generale. Interviews, texts and voiceovers by Sharon Stewart and myself, Joep Christenhusz. Editing and sound production by Dennis Gaans of Onderkast. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye.